I loved her louder once I did. I kept her for 15 months. That sentence never gets easier to say. 15 months. I fed her and bathed her and sang to her and took her to her checkups and watched her learn to sit up and then stand and then take the 3 teetering steps that made me gasp out loud in the kitchen of my mother's house. 15 months of her being entirely mine. And then my mother got sick, and my job at the diner wasn't enough. And the father was gone. Not violent, just gone, the way some men go when reality costs more than they budgeted for. And there was a couple. Gerald and Sylvia Beaumont, church people, stable, late 30s, unable to have their own children. They had been fostering for 2 years. They wanted to adopt. My mother's pastor introduced us. Gerald was a high school principal. Sylvia taught 3rd grade. They had a house in Decatur with a yard and a swing set that they had put up before they even had a child to swing on it. Sylvia showed me photographs. She said, "We will love her like she was born to us." I signed the papers on a Thursday in October. It was raining. I remember the sound of the rain on the courthouse roof, and the weight of the pen in my hand, and the way the social worker smiled at me like she was doing me a kindness. Renee was 15 months old. She would not remember me. That was the cruelest part, and also, I told myself, the merciful one. Gerald and Sylvia had agreed to an open adoption, letters twice a year, photographs on her birthday, and when Renee was old enough to understand, to make her own choice, they would tell her. They would explain. They would let her decide if she wanted to know me. That was the agreement. I want you to hold that word, agreement. For the first 7 years, they honored it. I received photographs of Renee on her birthday and at Christmas. I watched her grow. The gap-toothed smile at 5, the braids at 7, the missing front tooth at 8 that made her look like a little prize fighter. I wrote letters twice a year that the social worker forwarded. I never knew if Renee saw them. I was never sure I was supposed to ask. When she was 8, the photographs stopped coming. I waited 6 months before I contacted the agency. The social worker said the Beaumonts had requested a closed update to the arrangement, that they felt it was in Renee's best interest, that they appreciated my cooperation. I was 30 years old. I was working as an accounting assistant, taking night classes for my certification, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Atlanta that smelled like the neighbors' cooking, and felt, in the evenings, very large. I held the phone in my hand for a long time after that call. I did not throw it. I did not cry. Not right then. I wrote a letter to Gerald and Sylvia Beaumont instead. 2 pages, handwritten, careful. I asked them to reconsider. I reminded them of the agreement. I told them I was not asking to disrupt anything. I only wanted to know she was well. I told them I would accept whatever terms they set. They did not respond. I sent a second letter 8 months later. A third one, the following spring. Nothing. I hired an attorney, a woman named Patricia Odom, sharp and quiet, who specialized in adoption law and had seen this particular situation more times than she liked to admit. Patricia told me that in Georgia, at that time, an open adoption agreement was not legally enforceable in the way a court order is, that the Beaumonts had technically the right to close the arrangement, that my options were limited in ways that were not fair, but were real. I sat in Patricia's office on a Wednesday afternoon, on a leather chair that was slightly too large for me, and I understood for the first time what it means to be right and powerless at the same time. I did not give up. But I learned over the years that followed to carry the hope differently, not in my hands where I might drop it, but somewhere deeper, where it wouldn't be visible to people who might mistake it for weakness. Walter knew about Renee before we married. I told him on our 4th date, at a diner on Ponce de Leon Avenue, over pie that neither of us finished. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was one of the first signs I knew he was different. Then he said, "That's a hard thing you've carried. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. We never had other children. It wasn't for lack of wanting. The wanting just never became the thing itself, and after a while we stopped naming it out loud. Walter said once that maybe God figured one daughter was what he'd given us, and we should trust the arithmetic. I didn't always trust it. But I trusted Walter, and sometimes that was enough. When Renee was 22, she found me. Not a letter, not through the agency. She found me the way the young find people now, methodically, digitally, with a determination that I recognized as her own even before I knew her well enough to know it. She had known she was adopted since she was 7. The Beaumonts had told her that much. They had told her her birth mother had been young and unprepared and had made the loving choice. That was the story she had lived inside for 15 years. She emailed me on a Tuesday. The subject line said, "I think you might be my birth mother. My name is Renee." I read it 4 times before I replied. Then I called Patricia Odom, who had become something of a friend over the years, and I said, "She reached out." And Patricia said, "I know. What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to answer her." What followed were 3 years of something I don't have a single clean word for. Not reconciliation, because that implies something was broken between us, when really we had never been whole. Not reunion, too festive, too easy. What it was a slow and careful building. Letters that became phone calls that became a lunch in the spring of her 24th year at a cafe in Decatur that was close enough to where she grew up that she could walk there. I recognized her the moment she walked in. Of course I did. She was mine. She was also, by that point, someone the Beaumonts had built. And that was fine. That was always going to be true. What mattered was that she was here, in this cafe, sitting across from me with her hands flat on the table and her eyes moving over my face like she was reading something she had been trying to find for a long time. "You look like me," she said. "You look like you," I told her. "That's better." We met 6 more times over the following year. In private, carefully, the way you tend something fragile. Renee said she hadn't told the Beaumonts. She said she needed to understand who I was before she had that conversation. I said I understood. I said I would follow her lead. What I didn't know, what she didn't know yet either, was what Gerald and Sylvia Beaumont would do when they found out. That April, 2 weeks before Renee's 27th birthday, they found out. The call came on a Thursday morning, April 7th, at 8:22 a.m. I know the time because I was sitting at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee and my reading glasses on, going through the previous month's bank statements. Old habit from my accounting days, I still review everything by hand. And the phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. "Miss Caldwell?" The voice was a man's. Measured the way people are measured when they've rehearsed what they're about to say. "My name is Gerald Beaumont. I believe you know my daughter." I set down my coffee. I took off my reading glasses and folded them on the table. "Yes," I said. "I do." He paused. I imagine he expected more from me at that point, an apology perhaps, or a defensive rush of words. People who have never dealt with silence as a tool always underestimate what happens when you simply don't fill it. "We need to talk," he said, "about what you've been doing." I want to be fair to Gerald Beaumont here, because I promised myself when I started telling this story that I would be fair to everyone in it, even the ones who weren't fair to me. Gerald was not a cruel man by nature. He was a frightened one. He had spent 26 years raising a daughter he loved, genuinely, structurally loved, the way parents love when they've put their whole lives into a child. And now the thing he had quietly feared since she was 7 years old was standing in the room. I understand that fear. I don't excuse what he did with it, but I understand it. He told me I had been selfish. He used that word 3 times in the first 4 minutes. He told me I had inserted myself into a family without invitation, without consideration for the stability that Renee depended on, without thinking about what my presence would cost. He told me that Renee was upset, which I doubted, because I had spoken to Renee 2 days prior, and she had sounded steady, and that Sylvia was devastated, which I believed. He said, I'm asking you, woman, I'm asking you as Renee's father to step back. I noticed the correction. Woman to woman, he was about to say. He caught it. It told me something. Gerald, I said, I appreciate you calling. I'd like to speak with Renee directly. Renee doesn't need to speak with you. That's her choice to make, not yours. He hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock, not because I was waiting, but because I needed to know how long it took for my pulse to return to its regular rhythm. 11 minutes. Then I called Patricia Odom. Patricia picked up on the second ring. I told her what had happened. She listened without interrupting, which is why I have kept calling her for decades. Did he threaten anything specific? She asked. No, but the call itself was a threat. He wanted me to know they knew. What do you want to do? I want to document everything, I said, starting now. That afternoon, I wrote down everything Gerald had said during the call, as precisely as I could remember it. Time, date, exact words. I had kept records of my attempts to maintain contact with the Beaumonts for years. The letters, the dates I sent them, the non-responses. I pulled that folder out of the filing cabinet in my spare room, and I laid everything on the kitchen table, and I looked at it. 12 years of documented effort. 12 years of being reasonable, of following proper channels, of refusing to be the kind of woman they could point to and call difficult. I called Renee that evening. She answered on the first ring. I could hear it in her breathing before she said a word, tight, controlled, the breathing of someone who had been crying and did not want to be caught at it. They know, she said. I know they know. Your father called me this morning. A long pause. What did he say? He asked me to step back. Another pause. Did you? No. I kept my voice even. Renee, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. How are you? She was quiet for a moment. Then, they're not taking it well. I understand that. My mom cried for 2 hours. My dad says he feels like I went behind his back. Her voice was careful, picking its way through the words like she was navigating something she hadn't mapped yet. Did we... I feel like I did something wrong. And I know logically that's not... You didn't do anything wrong, I said. You made the choice that was yours to make. You found your birth mother. You got to know her. That is not wrong. They don't see it that way. I know. That's their fear talking. Fear makes people call reasonable things wrong. She exhaled. It sounded like it was the first full breath she'd taken in hours. We talked for 40 minutes that night. I listened more than I spoke. At the end, she said, I'm not going to stop seeing you. I just want you to know that, whatever they say. I said, you do what you need to do. I'm not going anywhere. What I did not say, what I was already thinking, quietly, the way I always think through things that need careful navigation, was that the Beaumonts were not going to simply accept this. Gerald's call had not been a conversation. It had been a warning shot, and people who fire warning shots are usually loading something bigger. I was right. 12 days before Renee's birthday, April 10th. Renee told me over the phone that the Beaumonts had asked her to choose. Not in those exact words. They were careful people, raised right enough to know that ultimatum said plainly can be held against you. What Sylvia had said, and Renee repeated it to me word for word, was, we just need to know that we're your family. That's all. We just need to know where we stand. Where you stand, I told Renee, is exactly where you stood before any of this. You're their daughter. Nothing that happens between you and me changes that. I know, she said. But they can't seem to understand that there's room for both. They're afraid there isn't. Do you think there is? I chose my words carefully. I think love doesn't work the way they're imagining it does. Like a pie. If you give a slice to one person, there's less for everyone else. It doesn't work like that. But fear can make you believe it does. What I was doing over those 12 days while the Beaumonts applied their particular pressure, the Sunday dinners where the atmosphere was heavy, the calls from Sylvia that Renee described as simultaneously loving and suffocating, the pointed comments about loyalty and gratitude and what a family means. What I was doing was staying steady and documenting everything and talking to Patricia twice. Patricia pulled the original adoption paperwork. The open adoption agreement, signed by me, signed by the Beaumonts, witnessed and notarized, was there in black and white. It was not legally enforceable in the punishing sense, but it was there. It was proof that an agreement had been made and then broken. Not by me. "What are you thinking?" Patricia asked. "I'm thinking about Renee's birthday," I said. "April 22nd. She mentioned she wants to have dinner with Marcus and the kids. I don't know where." "You're not planning to—" "No," I said. "I already made plans of my own. Paulette wants to take me to that new place in Midtown, Langford's Grill." Patricia was quiet for a moment. All right. She knew me well enough to trust my word. What I didn't know, what no one could have planned, was what April 22nd would actually bring. The night before, April 21st, I ironed my navy dress. I set out the pearl buttons earrings. I made sure my phone was charged. Gerald Beaumont had called once more. April 15th, 9:08 in the morning. He had been calmer that time, calculated. He told me that if I continued to pursue a relationship with Renee against the wishes of her family, they would be forced to make certain things very clear to her. He didn't specify what things. He didn't need to. The implication was plain. There were things he could say about me, about why I had given her up, about what I had done and not done in those 15 months, that would color how she saw me. I said, "Gerald, I kept every letter, every court document, every record of every attempt I made to maintain contact that you refused to honor. If you'd like to have a conversation about history, I'm happy to have it." He hung up again. I wrote that call down too. Time, date, what was said. Then I made sure my folder was in order. Not because I planned to use it that night, but because a woman who has learned to document her life knows that the truth needs a place to live. The moment Renee looked up from her table and her eyes found mine, not just up at the ceiling, but across the room, to table 7, to me, I knew she had seen me. The first thing that moved across her face was shock. Then something softer, complicated, the way her expressions always are when she's feeling more than one thing at once. Then she looked at Gerald. It was 7:14 in the evening. Paulette put her hand on mine under the table. She said nothing. Good woman. Gerald Beaumont looked up 2 seconds later, following Renee's eyes, the way parents always follow their children's gaze. And the moment he saw me, his face did something I had not expected. It didn't harden immediately. For just a moment, 2, 3 seconds, it went blank. The blankness of a man whose calculations have just encountered a variable he didn't put in the equation. Then it hardened. He said something to Renee. I couldn't hear it across the room, but I could read the posture. His shoulders squared, his head tilted just slightly toward her, the body language of a man issuing an instruction. Renee didn't move. Marcus, her husband, who I had met twice and liked immediately for the quiet, attentive way he paid attention to his wife, looked from Gerald to Renee to across the room, and he found me too. He didn't know who I was at first. Then something shifted in his face, and I could see that he knew. It was Renee who stood up. She said something to Marcus, something short, a hand on his arm, and then she began walking toward my table. Not hurrying. Walking with the unhurried steadiness of a woman who has decided something. Gerald rose from his chair. Renee. His voice carried just enough across the restaurant. A few nearby tables glanced over. The child at the window table stopped laughing. She didn't stop. She walked the 40 feet between our tables like she had always known the way, and when she arrived at table 7, she stood in front of me and she said, "Hi, Dot." That was what she had started calling me. Dot. Not Mom. We both knew that word belonged to Sylvia, and I had never asked for it back. Just Dot. I had come to love it more than I can explain. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "Happy birthday." Her eyes were bright in the way that means you've decided to hold yourself together and you're holding on hard. "I didn't know you were going to be here. I didn't know you were going to be here." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Langford's is my favorite restaurant. I eat here every birthday. Paulette recommended it." She looked at Paulette, who gave her the kind of smile that only church ladies of a certain age can produce, full of grace and absolutely no apology. Renee almost smiled back. Then Gerald Beaumont arrived at the table. He didn't come alone. Sylvia was 3 steps behind him, and behind her, 2 tables worth of family. Marcus, who had stood up but hung back, the children, another couple I didn't recognize, who must have been Beaumont family. They all stayed at a distance. It was Gerald and Sylvia and me. "Renee," Gerald said, "come back to the table." "In a minute, Dad. Now, please." The please was strained. The kind of please that isn't. Renee turned to look at him. Her face was careful, controlled. She got that from somewhere, and I won't flatter myself into thinking it was entirely from me, but I recognized it. "I want to say hello to Dorothy," she said. "That's all." Gerald looked at me then, directly. The restaurant sounds seemed to recede a little, not gone, just further away. "Ms. Caldwell," he said. His voice was formal. If he was going to do this in public, he was going to do it with his posture straight. I respected that, in a strange way. "I think you understand that your being here is inappropriate." "I made a dinner reservation 3 weeks ago," I said. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Nevertheless, Gerald." Sylvia put her hand on his arm. She was a slight woman, Sylvia, smaller than I'd imagined in the years I'd imagined her. She had kind eyes that were currently full of tears she was refusing to let fall. When she spoke to me, her voice was quiet. "Why are you doing this?" "I'm having dinner," I said, "with my friend. You know what I mean. She wasn't hostile. Sylvia, unlike Gerald, was not built for hostility. She was built for hurt, which in some ways is harder to sit across from." "You know what I mean. Why did you come back into her life?" "She was fine. She was fine." "Mom," Renee said softly. "Please." "She was, Renee. You were happy. You were whole. And now, I'm still whole." Renee's voice didn't rise. She simply said it, plainly, the way you state something that has always been true. "I'm whole, and I know Dorothy. Both things are real." Gerald made a sound, not quite a word, more like something he chose to swallow. Then he said, "We gave you everything, everything, and you, Daddy." The word came out different than I'd ever heard Renee say it. Quieter, older. "I love you. You know that. I'm not sitting with Dorothy because I love you less. I'm sitting with Dorothy because she's part of who I am, and I can't keep apologizing for wanting to know that." The child at the window table had started laughing again. The waiter who'd been hovering at the edge of our section had quietly redirected himself to the far side of the room. Paulette was very still next to me, her sweet tea untouched. Gerald sat down in the empty chair at our table. He just sat down, without asking. The way men who have been in charge of things for a long time sometimes do, in moments of crisis, without thinking about whether the chair is theirs. "Then let's talk," he said, not loudly, but with a weight that meant he'd been carrying something and he was setting it down whether I was ready or not. I folded my hands on the table. "All right." He looked at me for a long moment. The restaurant moved around us. Then he said, "You gave her up. You made that choice. And we built our family from that choice, and I don't apologize for that, not for a single day of it." "I don't expect you to," I said. "Then why couldn't you leave it alone?" "Because I never agreed to disappear. We had an arrangement. You ended it without telling me why and without asking Renee what she wanted. She was 8 years old. She was 8 years old, and then she was 12, and then she was 18, and at some point, Gerald, she became a woman who got to decide for herself. I kept my voice the same temperature it had been since he sat down, and she decided. I didn't go looking for her. She found me. Sylvia made a small sound. She was standing just behind Gerald's shoulder, and when she made that sound, Gerald reached back and found her hand. Even in the middle of this, I noticed that. He reached back for her without looking. 26 years. We were afraid, Sylvia said. Her voice was very thin. When she was little, we were afraid that if she knew too much, she'd feel like she wasn't really ours. She is really yours, I said. And I meant it. That is the hardest thing to explain to people who haven't lived it. That you can love a child, that a child can belong to you in more than one direction at once. That the word mine doesn't have to be a fence. She is your daughter. Nothing about me changes that. But I am also part of who she came from, and she deserved the chance to know that. The chair scraped. Gerald stood up. He stood up and he looked at Renee, and his face was the face of a man at the edge of something. Grief, maybe, or the particular exhaustion of realizing that you have spent years fighting a battle you didn't actually need to fight. I need to go sit down, he said. It wasn't to me. It was just said, out loud, to the air. Renee stepped forward and hugged him. He held on longer than I expected. Then Sylvia looked at me. Just looked at me for a moment, without speaking. Her face was complicated in the way that real things always are. Then she said, "She looks like you. I noticed it the first time I noticed it." "I know," I said quietly. Sylvia nodded. Then she followed her husband back to their table. Renee sat down in Gerald's vacated chair. The four of us, me, Renee, Paulette, and the seat that was now empty, sat in the particular silence that comes after something large has moved through a room. The waiter appeared. He looked at Renee and then at the rest of our table and made a professional decision. "Can I bring you anything?" Renee looked at me. Something in her face had loosened. Not broken, not collapsed, but loosened, the way a knot releases when the pull from both sides finally eases. "Can I sit with you for a little while?" she asked. "Before I go back over? You can sit with me as long as you want." She told the waiter she'd have a water. He disappeared. Then she said, "You brought the folder, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. She knew me. I reached into the bag by my feet and placed the folder on the table between us. A plain manila folder held shut by an elastic band containing 12 years of letters and certified mail receipts and non-responses and documentation. It wasn't thick. That was the hardest part. How thin 12 years of trying can look when it's laid flat. Renee put her hand on it. She didn't open it. She just held it there. "I didn't know," she said, "about the letters. I know you didn't. They never told me you kept trying. I know." She was quiet for a moment. The candle light moved across the table between us. Somewhere behind her, at the Beaumont table, one of the children said something, and Marcus laughed. "What do you want?" she asked. "Not tonight. I mean, going forward. What do you actually want?" I thought about that for a moment, because it deserved a real answer. Not the answer that would make her feel less burdened. The real one. "I want to know you," I said. "Whatever that looks like, in whatever time we have. I want to know who you are and watch your children grow and have you know that there is someone in this world who has been rooting for you since before you knew she existed." I paused. "That's all. I am not asking to replace anything. I never was." She nodded slowly. The tears she'd been holding back the whole conversation came then, not dramatically, just two, quietly, which she wiped with the back of her hand. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Okay." She looked up at me, her mother's eyes. "I'll figure it out with them. It's going to take time, but I'm not going to disappear again. You don't have to figure anything out for me tonight. Tonight is your birthday." She almost laughed. "What a birthday." "Sweetheart, Paulette said, first time she'd spoken in 20 minutes. "I've lived 73 years, and I have never seen a birthday dinner like this one, and I mean that as the highest compliment." Renee looked at Paulette. Then she really did laugh. At 8:47, Renee stood up and said she was going back to her family. She hugged me, properly, both arms, the kind of hug that says something real. I held on for exactly as long as she did and released when she released. She walked back to the Beaumont table. She sat down next to Marcus. He put his arm around her. Across the room, Gerald looked at his plate. Sylvia reached out and touched Renee's hand. Nobody was happy, exactly, but nobody was performing either. That was something. That was, I thought, the beginning of something that might eventually become all right. Paulette refilled her sweet tea. "Well," she said, "the cobbler here had better be worth it." "It is," I told her. "Paulette, it really is." In the weeks after Renee's birthday, things moved the way they always move when people have finally said out loud what they've been circling for years, slowly, awkwardly, with backsliding and tenderness in equal measure. Gerald called me on a Tuesday, 9 days after Langford's. I let it ring once, braced myself, then answered. "Ms. Caldwell." A long pause. "I owe you an apology." I hadn't expected that. "I'll say so plainly." "I'm listening," I said. He told me that he and Sylvia had sat down with Renee the Sunday after her birthday, that Renee had brought the folder, my folder, the one I'd left with her, that she'd laid it open on their kitchen table and gone through it, piece by piece. The letters, the certified mail receipts, the documented non-responses. Gerald said, "I didn't realize she kept trying. We told ourselves it was cleaner. That less contact was better for Renee. I think we were also—" He stopped. "We were also afraid of exactly what happened, of her wanting to know you and us feeling like that meant something about us." "I know," I said. "That wasn't fair to you." "No, it wasn't." Another pause. "Renee wants us to. She's asked us to try, to get to know you, eventually. Not overnight, but eventually." I was at my kitchen table when he said this. The same table where I'd sat 11 months of mornings eating breakfast alone and 12 years of Aprils that came and went without a photograph. I looked at the window. The azaleas in the backyard were blooming pink and extravagant, the way they do every spring in Georgia without being asked. "I'd like that," I said. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. Forgiveness takes time, and I have learned not to hand it over before it's ready, because premature forgiveness tends to break when weight is put on it. But it was a door opening. I have never been the kind of woman who walks past an open door. Patricia Odom took me to lunch that Friday at a place on Peachtree that does a good shrimp and grits. She ordered sweet tea. I ordered water. We talked for 2 hours. "You know what strikes me most?" she said, setting down her fork. "That you never used the folder as a weapon. You just kept it, let it be the truth, and trusted that eventually the truth would have its moment." "I didn't know when the moment would come," I said. "I just knew it would. Most people can't live that way. Most people need the vindication while they can still feel it." "I felt it," I said. Renee's face when she saw those letters. That was enough. Patricia nodded. She'd been my attorney for 22 years, and my friend for most of them. She knew when I was understating something and when I was saying the precise true thing. She let this one sit. What I didn't say to Patricia, what I carried home and held privately, was the complexity of what I actually felt in those weeks. Because it wasn't triumph. It wasn't even pure relief. It was something messier. The particular grief of being right about something you would have preferred to have been wrong about. If the Beaumonts had honored the agreement from the beginning, there would have been no folder to open on a kitchen table. There would have been no 12-year silence to explain. Renee would have known me differently, gradually, gently, without the drama of a confrontation in a restaurant on her birthday. I would have given almost anything for that version of the story. But that was not the version we had. we had this one. And in this one, Renee was in my life, and the folder had done what it was meant to do, and Gerald Beaumont was trying, and Sylvia had texted me a week after the birthday, a photograph of Renee at 7, gap-toothed, in a yellow dress. She wrote, "I thought you might want this." I stared at that photograph for a long time. Then I saved it to a folder on my phone and named it simply Renee. 6 weeks after Langford's Grill, Renee brought Deja and little Corey to my house on a Saturday afternoon in June. I had made lemonade, real lemonade, with the lemons squeezed and the simple syrup and the fresh mint from the pot on my back step. I had made tea cookies from a recipe my mother used to make. I had put out a tablecloth that Walter's mother had quilted, the one with the yellow and cream squares. I was nervous. I will admit that. 70 years old and nervous over a Saturday afternoon, which tells you something about the way love refuses to behave appropriately. Deja was 9. She walked into my kitchen with the frank assessment of a child who has not yet learned to pretend to be interested when she isn't, looked at the cookie plate and said, "Are those the thin kind or the soft kind?" "Soft," I said. She considered this. "Okay." And she took one. Corey was 5 and shy in the particular way of 5-year-olds who become loud the moment they feel safe. By the time we'd been sitting in the backyard for 20 minutes, he was loud. Renee sat across from me at the patio table, her hands around a glass of lemonade, watching her children chase something, a butterfly maybe, or just the idea of one, across the yard. "They like it here," she said. "I hope so." "Deja asked me on the way over if you were her grandmother." She paused. I said you were someone very important to me. I said we were still figuring out the words. That's honest. Is it all right? That I didn't say, "Renee." I kept my voice easy. Words take time. The important thing is that they're here. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I keep thinking about those letters, the ones you sent, the ones they never gave me." She shook her head slowly. "I read them all. You wrote to me every spring, every April, right around my birthday, every year from the time I was 8 until I reached out to you. Every April," I confirmed. "What did you think when you didn't hear back?" I thought about how to answer that honestly without giving her the version she might carry as guilt. I thought that you were alive and hopefully well, and that someday you would have the choice you deserved. I tried to make sure that if you ever went looking, you would find something. Her eyes were bright. She looked at the yard. Corey had stopped chasing whatever he was chasing and was now sitting in the grass examining something on the ground with the intense focus of a scientist. "You were patient," she said. "I had to be. Most people wouldn't be. I'm not most people." I said it gently, without pride, just as a fact, and you were worth being patient for. We sat there for a while without talking, which is a thing I have always valued. The ability to sit with someone in quiet without it meaning anything is wrong. The June air was warm and still, and the yard smelled like cut grass and the mint from my porch pot. Deja had found a ladybug somewhere and was informing her brother about it with great authority. "I want them to know you," Renee said finally. "Not as a complicated thing, just as Dorothy, as someone who loves them. I'd like that very much. Mom and Dad." She used those words without apology, the way she always would. The way she should. They're trying. It's slow, but they're trying. "My dad asked me last week what your favorite kind of pie was." I looked at her. "He did? He said he was thinking of bringing something next time he sees you." She raised an eyebrow. "I told him you liked pecan." "I do like pecan." "I know." I laughed. Quietly at the table, in my backyard in June, with my daughter's children in the grass, and the mint on the porch, and the quilted tablecloth, and the soft cookies. It wasn't everything. It wasn't the 15 months I lost, or the 12 years of silence, or the version of the story where none of it had to hurt this much. It was what it was, small and real, and mine. That was enough, more than enough. That was, in fact, the whole world. There is something I want to tell you about documentation. Not the accounting kind, though I spent 30 years doing that too, and it has its own uses. I mean the kind of documentation that has nothing to do with litigation or evidence or proving a point. The kind that is simply, I was here. This happened. This is what was real. For 12 years, I wrote down what I did, the letters I sent, the calls I made, the doors that were closed before I could reach them. Not because I was certain those records would ever matter in any official way, but because the truth needs a place to live. When the world around you is rewriting what happened, when people's memories and defensiveness and fear start to revise the story, your documents are what remain. They are solid. They do not shift. But here's what I really want to say. I kept that folder for Renee, not for Gerald, not for a courtroom, not for my own satisfaction. I kept it because I believed, even in the years when I had no evidence to support the belief, that one day my daughter would want to know the truth about what I had done, about whether I had tried, about whether she had mattered enough to keep trying for. She did. She does. She always will. If you are in a season of quiet persistence, if you are doing the right thing without an audience, documenting, waiting, holding your truth steady in the face of people who would prefer a different version, I want you to know that the quiet is not the same as defeat. Silence is not the same as surrender. Some of the most powerful things I have ever done, no one witnessed. The witnessing comes later, or it doesn't come at all, and you still did the right thing, and that still counts. And if you have a Renee in your life, someone you love across a distance you didn't choose, I want to say this carefully, because I know how many shapes that can take. You are not obligated to stop loving people who cannot currently reach back. Love does not expire. It changes form. It lives in folders and April letters and the soft cookies on a quilted tablecloth in June. It waits. I waited. And on an ordinary Saturday in Midtown, Georgia, in a restaurant I chose for the peach cobbler, my daughter walked 40 feet across a dining room and said, "Hi, Dot," and everything I had been carrying rearranged itself. Not disappeared, just rearranged, into something I could actually set down. Whatever you are carrying tonight, I want you to know that you are not carrying it alone. This community, the people in these comments who keep showing up week after week, they are proof of that. Real proof, the kind I'd put in a folder. If this story touched something in you, I want to ask you to do something for me. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and leave me a comment, because I read them, everyone, and I think about you. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? I genuinely want to know. Wherever you are, whatever hour it is, whatever season you're in, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you sat down with me tonight. Still waters run deep. Thank you for sitting with me in them.